Hi, I'm Dr. Morbaja, astrodynamicist, space environmentalist, and associate professor of aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics at the University of Texas at Austin. And I listen to the Cold Star Project.
This show is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be what is termed professional advice. The Cold Star Project is proudly presented by the Operational Excellence Society. Cold Star Tech is a supporter of the OPEX Society, and Jason Kanigan is a member of its board of advisors. Talk with us at Cold Star Tech to find out more about the OPEX Society and what we can achieve together in your organization, or just visit opexsociety.org. Thanks for joining us for today's show. Today's guest is Dr. Andrew Aldrin, Associate Professor and Director of the Aldrin Space Institute. He teaches right now at the Florida Institute of Technology, and he's also with the International Space University folks, running a great program. It's called the Graduate Commercial Certificate Program, and it's all about how to be an entrepreneur in the space industry, and it is incredibly valuable. It's something that everyone in the space industry really needs to participate in and understand. We've talked about it several times. Andy approached me a little while ago and said, hey, let's do another talk here. And I was like, all right, what do you want to talk about? So the state of the space industry right now and the economy. What is the space economy, and what do we need to do to grow it? I personally have been getting kind of frustrated with the lack of a true commercial space industry. The money is still coming from government, and that's not exactly what I'd like to see happening. I'd like to see a lot more true commercial activity, but as Dr. Aldrin explains in our discussion, maybe we need some more of this government spending for the moment. And as usual, I've come away with an improved perspective on the space industry and investment and what we need to do to get it done. And he really divides it up into two types, two classes of investment that needs to be made, the infrastructure side and the services or application side. And they both truly do need different models, different investment models. And so let's listen in, let's have a great discovery conversation here. I think this will be as educational for you as it was for me. Truly enjoy having Andy on. So Andy, welcome. Hey, we're back with Dr. Andrew Aldrin, who is teaching at the Florida Institute of Technology, International Space University. He's been running a really interesting commercial space certificate program there for a couple years now, and we've had a few episodes about that. We've also studied his PhD, remember he is a doctor, and looked at the history of Soviet space development, which is a fascinating topic, and how there was a kernel of entrepreneurialism in that topic. And so he wanted to come back on today, and we're going to talk about the maturation of the space industry. I don't know too many people beyond the venture capitalists who want to talk about this stuff. Most people who are founders want to talk about their cool technology. Andy, welcome. And let's start with this. I just ran a workshop for space founders, and I was a little bit discouraged that there wasn't as much interest as I had hoped in learning business fundamentals. I think there's still far too much love of the technology, right? And we're going to go to the DoD or the DIU, and they're going to pay for it. What's your opinion on that?
So, this is something that we really concentrate on in our graduate program, that you've got to understand the market, you've got to understand the ecosystem. So I come in here with a little bit of a bias. Very rarely is a technology alone sufficient. You've got to understand there has to be a need. There has to be a need to use that technology to perform a task, and that has to be worth paying you something for, a profit, right? It's fundamentally, right? It's all about profit equals revenue minus cost. And if you don't get that right, your history, the technology doesn't matter. And so what's happened a little bit is, I think we have understandably fallen in love with the Silicon Valley model, which is that you come up with something cool, somebody wants it, and you can build a business very quickly and instantly have revenue and tremendous growth opportunities, and it all happens. And space is different that way. I mean, the first thing is there are lots of different segments in space, but you know, at its base, they're kind of two space programs. There's the hardware, whether it's launch, whether it's spacecraft, whether it's ground systems, and then there's the applications. And the applications, frankly, look like fit the Silicon Valley model. It works for venture capital, where your venture capitalist needs to have 20% returns, 5 years, and they're out, right? And it's hard to do that in space with the hardware, right? It's hard to get something done in 5 years. It's hard to make margins that are going to be able to pay your investors 20% annual returns, because you're not going to have any revenues for the first few years. And the entire hardware market isn't really that large. You know, of the, whatever, we've got $400 billion space market today, about 100 million of that's hardware. The rest of it is communications, it's GPS chips, it's other services. And so we tend to take that $400 billion and say that that's all hardware, and it's not. And so, and the growth is primarily going to be in the applications and communications, Earth observation, and those kind of areas. So we're kind of falling in love with a model that applies to some of space and maybe the majority of the space economy, but it doesn't work for the part of space that we really need, which is hardware. We need to have hardware ultimately. And I do worry that you're going to have a portion of the space economy and applications that's going to grow very rapidly and have reasonable economic returns, but hardware is going to get starved because it's not such a great investment.
Okay, I see the concern there. When we're looking at a Silicon Valley model, it assumes this large addressable market with tons of people who are buying things, and I'll bang that drum, right? The make space boring concept is about having the average guy on the street, and he wants to buy something made in space and it gets made up there and flown down to him or something, right? That's the idea I'm in love with. But you need infrastructure and infrastructure does not pay very well, as you say, right? It's the hard stuff. And unfortunately, we do need that in order to run the software and these applications on top of it. So yeah, I always come away from a talk with you, Andy, with a slightly improved perspective, which is great, you know. And today, this is the eye-opening part of it, right? It's like, well, you know, I'm very wary when I hear, but my business is different. I actually wrote a blog post about this years ago, right? All businesses are at essence the same, right? You provide something of value to somebody else and they pay you, and the money that they pay you should be more than what it costs you to do the thing, right? Provide the value, right? But as you say, with the Silicon Valley model, where, you know, and I taught this in the workshop, right? Go to the business model canvas and do the Steve Blank stuff, right? And it's great stuff, but the standards that apply for these models with the venture capitalists trying to make that 100x return, and as you say, they have a very limited time window. Right. Even Michael Mealing at Starbridge maybe has an 8 or 10 year window. It's not long enough, right, for space infrastructure. So maybe in the short term, while we go from 0 to 1 in the space industry, because we're not there yet, we got a bunch of ideas floating around. Maybe we need to treat these as two different business models. And so where does the money come from for the space infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of interesting things going on, and they will continue to be Silicon Valley investment, and the miniaturization of spacecraft has made it a lot more realistic to think of things getting done in 3 to 5 years and getting to revenue, but still the margins are going to be a tough sell. So that will still be there even in the hardware side of the business. But I think increasingly you're going to see a few things that I think are positive developments. One of the positive developments is government participation, right? So NASA is kind of playing with this model that they're going to buy services and is willing to put money up front to reduce the market risk. I mean, in business, there are really two risks. There's cost risk and there's revenue risk. And NASA is willing to absorb a significant portion of both of those for a service that they need. And so that's a really positive development. There are other things going on with governments, with AFWorks, with DIU, that I think are positive examples of how the government can provide some portion of risk reduction, whether it's finance, whether it's providing, revenue guarantees, loan guarantees, lots of different things that government can do to encourage the development of that infrastructure because they need it, right? So it's in their interest and the taxpayers' interests. And if you do all of these things right and you balance risk between government and industry, government can get a lot more for a lot less. So that's a really positive development.
Okay.
I think some of the mergers that are going on, whether it's Redwire, Voyager, have really positive implications. I mean, I'm encouraged by those because, again, it's kind of distributing risk. It's combining back office services and things like this. I think it's a positive development, and the people behind these things seem to be really sensible and they're doing good business. And so you could see that grow a fair amount, and I think that would be a really positive thing. And then there's SPACs. Then there's SPACs. And I think we're all kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen with SPACs. But whatever it is, whether this is sort of a balanced investment between early investors, late investors, it seems like it's a way to capitalize companies and provide a little bit more transparency, maybe not full transparency. And so those are kind of positive things. What worries me, though, is the valuations. And the valuations are they're crazy. It's really hard to get there without some really, really optimistic views of what's going to happen in the future. And the way SPACs report, because there isn't really audits and they can report future earnings based on what they think could happen. And I think it encourages a little bit too much optimism. Irrational exuberance maybe is something that's happening. I mean, these valuations are not sustainable. I mean, whether the companies themselves can sustain business is kind of the real question. And if they're going to get a big chunk of capital up front, I think that's a very positive thing. The thing that worries me is if they invest all of this capital to try and meet what are unrealistic business goals. And so they end up incurring huge fixed costs, which are dangerous. And it's the real, it's the alligator in the water of space industry, of the infrastructure side of it, fixed cost. That's what gobbles up companies. And so if they can avoid those kinds of things and they can keep enough dry powder to get through the shakeout, because we will have a shakeout, right? Just to use small launch as an example, we've got 100 and some odd companies, and we're actually doing a study on this. And the market, when you get down from the total addressable market down to a real serviceable market, can sustain maybe 2, maybe 3 companies. And even then, they can't sustain them at anything like the launch rate that they're expecting. I mean, we see, something like 125-ish launches a year in that market space. And you got one company that who shall remain nameless that's claiming they're going to get 300 launches, and they need that to maintain their valuation. And so there's going to be a shakeout in that industry, and there's going to be a shakeout in others as well. So the companies that come out of that, though, may emerge from that, if they're smart, may emerge from that stronger companies with larger market share and more profitability. And I think what I would look at is look at the companies that are using that cash wisely, and not over-investing, not incurring too much fixed cost, and build business models that allow them to survive at realistic markets. And the companies that come out of the shakeout may come out as really, really healthy companies. And there's, I'm not saying there's going to be a massive shakeout like what we had in 2000, but there is going to be a shakeout, to be sure. And if again, looking at small launch, there are something like 20 companies that have received hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of investment. I mean, these are real companies. And if only 2 or 3 of them are going to survive, it's not a great survival rate. But I guess, that's not atypical for venture capital, right? Because the
Mhm.
venture capital is looking for 10%, maybe 5%. And so, maybe that's what we're looking at.
Right. Yeah, most are going to lose. Well, I don't know. You're changing my mind in our discussion today about what expectations maybe. I've been really on Space's case, not that it cares, but about we need more commercial space companies, right? Less pulling money out of DoD and NASA and that, and more actual companies selling things, right? That people want to maybe other space companies or something, but having a real commercial model, not just moving government money underneath this cup and calling it private equity or private, money now, right? And
Right.
commercial money. And that's just not the case. So maybe we do need to look at it as this idea that, oh, we have to build the infrastructure. It's very expensive. Therefore, we need companies that have large cash reserves, because as you say, if there's trouble, they're not going to survive. And if all their money's tied up in the infrastructure, they're not going to have any money to continue to operate, to pay their people, right? So they better be
Right.
thinking about this now. Well, maybe I need to change my mind and, and get on
But,
board with the defense stuff a little more.
well, and don't forget, so you've got $400 billion economy today, which will grow to $1 trillion, which, initially when that number came out, I said, no, that can't be. But then I started looking and I go, okay, it's not crazy. I mean, it does involve a huge chunk of 400 billion or so is broadband, broadband data, internet, essentially. And that, I'm trying to understand how realistic that market looks, but we're early in that study. But don't forget that of the 400 billion, 100 billion of that, as I said earlier, is infrastructure. And almost all of that is government. 80 billion of it is government. 87 or something like that is government. And so the government spends money on infrastructure. They buy services too, but not as much. And so most of the commercial activity is on the services side. But increasingly, we see more and more companies getting into the hardware side. And interestingly, that seems to be where all the SPACs are concentrated in the top part of the business, because it may be that, for the easy part of the business, for the applications, venture capital is a perfectly good alternative. So the government is the 800-pound gorilla, whether it's the US government, the Chinese government, European governments, and they have legitimate needs for this 80, 90 billion dollars of infrastructure that they spend every year. And so they're going to be out there doing that. If they buy it as a service, that's a good thing. And if companies can take what the government investment is in buying their hardware and then use that hardware for commercial applications, that's a great thing. And we would like to see more innovative new companies coming into that market space. But it's going to have to make sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's kind of a beacon of hope then. that when you look at it, I've seen those kind of concentric circle pie chart type things drilling down into the space economy and that. And so it's good. It is good that the government is already investing that money, right? They don't need to be cajoled into it or anything like that.
Well, and it's not going to change dramatically.
Right. Right. Yeah. I can remember in my home province of British Columbia, there was a change in governments and people were oohing and awing, and there were major changes made in the services of like health and welfare and things like that. Right. But the budget changes were like 4%, 6%. They were not enormous things.
Right.
They did have big results.
Right.
A lot of people didn't like, but the changes were not enormous in terms of dollars.
People go nuts if NASA loses $1 billion, and that's 5%, which is a big deal. But the NASA budget is pretty stable. I mean, it's gone up lately over the last few years pretty significantly, and that's a good thing. But it is remarkably stable, and it's in some ways this is heresy, but I can be a heretic now. But I honestly think that we spend an awful lot of time worrying about public opinion in space,
Hmm.
when every time we attract public attention and political attention to the space program, since Kennedy,
Mm-hmm.
it ends up not working out all that well. And we had we've had significant changes over the past few administrations. It looks like we're going to weather this administration shift without significant changes. But it's interesting to note that there isn't a whole lot of discussion about space, and that's not a bad thing, because NASA's going to get its $10 billion and spend it on human spaceflight, whether there's public opinion support or not. Roger Lanius has actually looked at public opinion, since Apollo, before Apollo even, and it's remarkably stable. Whether it's in the peak of Apollo or the depths of the shuttle program, you still end up with like 20% of the people love space, another 40% maybe think it's okay, and then the other 40% don't really care at all, and it doesn't change.
Yeah.
And so, I think sometimes we worry too much about political support, public support, if you will. Political support is obviously there. It's there in terms of jobs, and we know that. But that's solid. That's a stable source of political support. So
Right.
I think we tend to play to the crowd a little too much sometimes.
Okay. Yeah. So just get on with the business of quietly creating the capabilities that we need to create. That's good for national security. I'm reminded of Henry Ford, right, and making the car, right? He said if I asked the public what it wanted, it would have said faster horse and carriages, right?
Right.
So
right.
it's like create this new thing and then confront the public with it and have them go, oh, like it's. I remember when the iPhone came out, right? It was totally different from the Blackberries or the flip phones or whatever we were using before. And I didn't know I wanted it until I saw it and I had it. And once in a while I'll run into people who say something like, oh, we should be fixing problems here on Earth before doing stuff in space. And I realize, first of all, right there, one, they don't know what the budget scales are.
Right.
And how tiny space is as far as the national budget goes. Two, it's a non sequitur. This is not an either or thing. Space helps terrestrial things. And, I just kind of think, great. Yeah. Like you say, get on with it, right? Let's pick our targets and our capabilities and go get it.
Yeah. I mean, the other is a bureaucratic political reality that programs get institutionalized. And so once they get institutionalized, they operate within boundaries. And I think, John Logson, whom I studied under a long, long time ago, wrote in one of his more recent books that under Nixon, space became normalized. It became a normal policy program, as opposed to under Kennedy, where it was an initiative, and we will never get back to that kind of initiative. It will be a normal program. And so let it be normal. But I realize that's heretical for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, but stirring up the hornet's nest often slows things down. I'm reminded of a sales principle which goes like this. It's very simple. Trust is speed. And if people are busy talking and discussing the merits and poking around trying to see, should we be doing this or not, there's no trust there. Right? If there's agreement and trust and we just put in the effort, then we can get to where we need to go. And then I think the public, once given all these new services that are suddenly available because of the infrastructure that's been quietly invested in over the past decade or 2 decades or whatever, will be delighted with it, right? That's the argument that I usually make to shut down the either or people about, space versus curing cancer or something like that. I usually say, so do you like your GPS? Right. And that 99% of the time shuts it down right there, like, yes.
Yeah,
they don't think about it. They think it comes out of their phone, I think. They don't really think about how this process works. Speaking of getting out into geo, having a wider perspective, what would you recommend, Andy, that in terms of, we've just talked a little bit about long range thinking. So national security does begin to play in there. What would, we were talking about increasing your vision as a company owner, as an entrepreneur, your vision of the whole economy, right? The space economy, the ecosystem. There's the word I'm looking for. It was an
Yeah.
E word, and I couldn't think about it. Right? What can you tell us about the thinking that you've been doing about visualizing that whole thing? Because I've realized in talking to you today, I may not have been approaching it as holistically as I would have liked to have believed.
So the first thing I'm going to say is we don't do a very good job teaching that, which not surprisingly, I'll tell you, is one of the things we focus on at the Center for Space Entrepreneurship, is that to be successful and in the space business long term, you really need to understand the whole infrastructure. And there are, I'll raise a couple of points. First is that there are really two things that investors look for. They look for the team, the quality of the team, the perseverance, the dedication of the team. The other thing they look at is knowledge of the ecosystem. One of the things they don't typically look at is get locked into the product or technology.
Yeah.
Because what happens, this is kind of the second thing, typically most businesses that are successful were not successful with plan A. They're on plan B, plan C, plan D. And if you don't understand the entire ecosystem, it's really hard to make those kind of snap judgments, to understand where the market is really headed. And, you know, fundamentally, you don't have a business if you don't have customers, as I mentioned earlier. But you've got to understand the whole ecosystem of suppliers, regulations, adjacent industries, complementers, competitors. You've got to understand all of this stuff in some depth. And so that's what we teach. I mean, we do some technology, and one of our 4 courses on technology and systems, so the business people can understand something about how these things work. But the rest of it is understanding policy, law, markets, and actually putting together a business that makes sense. This past year, as challenging as it was, because we went into this, you know, this time last year, we didn't know if we were going to have a program because of COVID. We had initially planned to do the whole thing in Florida, and what we ended up doing was we pivoted to what was going to be a hybrid program. We do 8 weeks online and 2 weeks in Florida as kind of, you know, give an opportunity for everybody to get together, tour all the facilities, see a launch, all the really cool stuff, combine that into 2 weeks. And we learned something really great, which is that by going online, we were able to bring in students. We had 3 students from Africa, a bunch of students from Europe. We had 1 student from Sri Lanka, and people from all around America. And these students were actually able to work while they're spending half of their day in class. And there's lots of reading. I mean, this is a real graduate program. But they were able to get through. But the thing that really got me is we had 4 of the teams, you know, one of the classes on entrepreneurship, 4 of the teams actually went out and they're going to market. And one of those teams has actually got through I guess an accelerator competition in a competitive program, actually got a sizable investment, $50,000. I can't talk about much more than that, but and so I'm super, super excited about that. The others, you know, are kind of, even if they're not successful, they're learning, and I'm communicating with all of them, and that's phenomenal. The other thing that just really, really impressed me was the quality of the work and the quality of the students that we had. So even though it was online, we had some great papers that are publishable quality. I was really excited about it. I'm super excited about what we have right now. I mean, we're almost getting to the point where we're getting full, and you know, we may have to make some hard decisions on who gets in, who doesn't, which is a great problem to have. Yeah. But I'm super, super excited about how that program is going, and mostly about where the students, you know, are taking it after they're done. And it's all about, you know, they understand the value about learning the ecosystem, because you know, if you're going through a forest and you're on a rabbit trail, that's not, if you don't know your way around, you don't know there are lions and tigers and bears, you're just going to stay on that rabbit trail, and that rabbit trail may lead you into a hole, you know?
Yeah, it might go nowhere. So we've got folks like Dylan Taylor at Voyager that are looking at building a value chain, really consciously going after this, right? And buying companies that give them capabilities, and instead of doing part C in A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They're gathering A through J or something like that, right?
Yeah, and I said
think
that's a super
that's the
positive
wise
development.
choice, right?
Yeah.
How can regular people who don't have bazillions of dollars to personally invest kind of adopt that perspective, or some of it at least, in looking at the space industry? Like, what do you look at, or who do you talk to, or I mean, I go around and I talk to everybody, and I still don't think I have as great a perspective as I would like.
Well, I mean, it's called learning in life.
Yeah.
Learning is a lifelong thing. I'm learning new things every day.
Yeah.
And it's really, really dynamic right now. And so that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So not everybody can go out and just be a Dylan Taylor. Dylan
Mm-hmm.
has been tremendously successful in other areas of business. But I think that one of the things that's really instructive is we jump to the Silicon Valley model, which is, what we need to do is, okay, so we'll get a little bit of money, we'll find an angel investor, and then we need to go find a VC that's going to give us piles of money and all that kind of stuff. There are other ways of building a company. You can bootstrap it from the ground up using government contracts, establishing sources of revenue, not over investing, not incurring too much fixed cost. And, a great example of this might be a company like Made in Space. For the first 5 years, they were operating, I think, completely on government contracts, and most of which were from NASA. And they have grown, and now they're accepting investments, but it's after they've got their technology base, they've established a track record, and they may be able to deliver the kinds of returns that venture capital is expecting. But it's really hard to make those returns when you're just starting out, especially if you're going to build a rocket or something like that. So I think one of the key pieces of advice is to look for ways of building your company organically as much as you can until you're at a point where you're really ready to accept the responsibility for the kind of growth that venture capital is going to throw at you, if that's the way you're going to go. Because it's tough if you've got a VC that's demanding 20x growth and is going to give you money. What you're going to do is you're going to have to ask for enough money in order to invest in the capital facilities to achieve those markets, whether they exist or not. Mm-hmm. And that's where you kind of get into a death spiral that I worry about. Mm-hmm. Is building companies based on a set of assumptions that you have to adopt in order to get to your valuation that you can't meet. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a huge fan of building companies, particularly on the hardware side, building companies slowly, having realistic market assessments. And that's not just how big is the market, but what's your competitive position in the market? Mm-hmm. What is it that you are going to do better than anyone else in order to draw capital? I mean, one of the things I love, I'll stay on launch because I grew up in that industry and I'm also doing a study. But I mean, in launch, there are really only a few things that matter. What matters is price. What matters is reliability, and what matters is customer confidence. But beyond that, the customer doesn't care if your rocket is additively manufactured or if you make it out of Play-Doh. If it works, that's great. It doesn't care if you got electric pumps or I don't know what solar powered pumps. It doesn't matter if it doesn't increase the performance. Well, they're not going to buy your launch vehicle if you don't have the performance to get them into the orbit or the place that they need to be in. But if you get them there reliably on time, that's it. The rest of it is just kind of hype.
Yeah. And this is something I've been saying for many years to business owners, founders in all kinds of industries, not just space. Get the result, right? Get the result, and the customer does not care how you get it, as long as you get it. I used to joke, if your thing is lead generation and your method of getting lead generation is getting a herd of zebras to run through town square with monogrammed blankets over their backs with the phone number of the customer on it, and that works, that owner, that customer of yours is going to be bragging, hey, did you see my zebra herd next week? Get off the tech, right?
It's very specific to the industry. Ferrari makes ungodly margins. They make ungodly margins because of their brand. and because it's a beautiful car. But that doesn't matter in the space business. It's all about perform in the hardware side of it. It's all about performance. Nobody cares if you got a pretty launch vehicle. All right. It could be,
Right.
it,
Could
it
be a
just,
rectangle. Yeah.
it, it,
If
it
that's how
doesn't
works.
matter. And so I think, the fundamentals really matter. And, there's an awful lot of hype in the business, which isn't part of business fundamentals that, maybe it helps to get investment, to be sure. And then that's the kinds of things you need to do to attract investment sometimes are antithetical to the kinds of things you need to do to make money. And and we've seen a lot of that wreckage.
Is the hype a moat? Is the thing being hyped really a protective moat? Or is it just something cool that you say now, and then once you've proven that there's a market, suddenly competitors will come in?
Well, and and it's, there's a lot of hype, which is not a moat. And investors are getting more sophisticated. And I think that's something that needs to happen. And I'm looking forward to more of that happening, but I guess, some of the valuations that have been thrown out in the last 6 months, since the last time we talked, have really made me wonder about the sophistication of investors. But then again, the SPACs are kind of odd investment vehicles because there's such a difference in the basic incentive structure between the founder of the SPAC, the retail investor, and the company.
Right. Yeah. And how the risk is distributed. I can say from personal experience, having talked to venture capitalists who are not sector specific in space, they do not know the space industry at all. They have heard a few names and that's it. And then they ask me, what do you think about this company? Right. And usually I have to be pretty firm about
But I mean, the thing that they should be
idea.
asking isn't, what do you think about this company? They should be thinking about, what do you think about this market segment?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
And
then go look for
what's
a good
happening
company.
in it? Yeah.
Yeah, because a venture capitalist, I mean, these are sophisticated people, the sophisticated companies that know how to evaluate management talent.
Right.
They don't know how to evaluate markets. And I think that's sort of the key, because you can throw out, all of the constellations, say, well, look, we got SpaceX put up 40,000 and Kuiper is going to put up another 15,000. And, who else is going to put up another 10,000 satellite constellation. And of course, there's plenty of launches for everybody. Well, no, none of those launches are going to small launchers. And unless you have real experience or real understanding, and that's easy. That's an easy market to figure out. But unless you have real understanding of it, it's easy to be seduced by that market.
People. Yeah. That's a toughie because I think of the commercial side of this industry, especially being nascent, having a lot of vigor and a lot of ideas, but how can you assess management talent when there hasn't been a lot of execution yet? Right? It's just ideas, right? In a lot of these cases.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly getting to the point where there are companies that are executing and building things. What we don't really know is how well they're executing their business and how profitable they are.
Right.
I mean,
do they have those cash reserves?
There aren't a lot of space companies that are that report to the SEC. And in that sense, I think some reporting through SPACs will help. And that'll be a good thing. But until we get real data, it's going to be hard to see who is really being profitable. And the other thing about this whole market, I mean, space technology is really mature. In fact, there aren't many companies that are out there that are doing things that are technologically new. But what is unknown is really the markets. And those are nascent, and that's what's immature. And that's what our understanding is necessarily immature, because it's almost unknowable, for example, what's going to happen in suborbital tourism. It's almost unknowable what's going to happen in orbital tourism. It's almost unknowable what's going to happen with commercial remote sensing, because there aren't very good databases to look at, to figure out whether these markets are going to make sense. And so Um, that doesn't mean you should just, that I think only increases the requirement for knowledge and understanding, um, and intelligence, right? Just look at, if it doesn't make sense, it ain't going to make dollars. I'll tell you that. And so that's what's immature, and that's what's in short supply. And of course, that's what I'm teaching, but
Right. Right.
this isn't about self-promotion.
Well,
Not
it
entirely.
can be a little bit. So, you come on,
No,
you provide a lot of
course.
value. Yeah, you could say a thing at the
No,
end.
of course. And it's not, it's not just for the people who are running these industries and trying to find markets. I think it's for the investors as well, and for policymakers, frankly.
Okay. Well, let's wrap up there because I know we're getting close to our time limit. What should people do next if they want to find out more about the program? I'll put a link into the description below.
If you did, okay, so it'd be fit.edu/ISU-CSE.
As simple as that, folks.
That's it. We
say that
wrap
20
up,
times fast.
Right. We wrap up our applications the end of the month. We start on May 18th. It'll be 8 weeks online, and then 2 weeks at the visitor complex at Kennedy Space Center, which is a phenomenal location. You have rockets all over the place. It's hard to imagine that 2 weeks going by without a launch, but we don't have a specific launch designated yet, but we will do something around the launch. We will have lots of guest speakers and people coming in to visit and touring facilities. It's going to be a great program this year. Looking at the students that we've got, it's just, I have very high expectations for this class.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, it's April, first week of April when this will come out. So get on this if you're hearing this and it's still before May. We've talked, Andy and I have talked about the program a couple times before. I'll drop a couple more links in the description so you can learn about it from the past experience. And I think it's incredibly sharply needed. If you like anything that you've heard today, I've said it myself. I don't think I'm a dumb guy, and I keep learning stuff here. So if I need it, everybody needs it, kind of thing here. So,
and maybe even if you don't like it, think about it for a little while. If it makes sense to you, come and visit us. And the best thing is to talk to some of the other students, because I think it's really been a tremendous experience for them.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right, Dr.
Jason,
Andrew Aldrin.
Always a pleasure.
It. You bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take care. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in working with us at Cold Star Tech, here are some of the things that we can help with. There's a lot of people who talk about process, documentation control, attention to detail, all this stuff. We help organizations become true learning organizations. Remember, if something isn't written down or recorded in some way that's accessible, searchable, findable, it didn't happen. It might as well not have happened. So if you have two people who solve a problem, a serious problem in your organization, but they do so in isolation and nobody finds out about it, which happens all the time, then it didn't really happen and nobody else can access that wisdom. So we unlock wisdom for your organization. We do a lot of things in the space industry. We have access to regulatory and legal officials who can help you, if you're a space industry founder, find out what areas of regulation and compliance do you need to be working with, compliant with. And we find a lot of folks don't even know about some of these areas. They don't even know that they exist. Can you imagine how you're going to stumble and stub your toe and really screw up your organization's timetable if you don't know about these things? So come and talk to us. We've got great relationships with the right people, especially in the United States and in England, and we'll be able to help you with that. And so when it comes to process improvement, whether that's some sort of business documentation, business development rules, wow, have I seen some things in business development. You got founders out there who all they're doing is quoting on projects. This is a mistake. You are wasting your energy bidding on things that most of which you never even had a chance of winning in the first place. I've seen people bankrupt themselves bidding on everything, or bidding on only these high-end things and not realizing that you need to have a strategy so that this bidding process pays for itself. I mean, you got to learn how to screen here. And this is not something that they teach you in school. I had to learn it myself, so don't feel bad about it, but come talk to us about it, okay? So either it's on the business process side or the actual manufacturing of physical goods. that kind of process improvement, you can come talk to us. Can this be done faster, cheaper, better? And yes, most of the time it sure can, because people just do stuff, and the first person to invent the way of doing things is the person who gets to choose most of the time how things are done. This happens all over the place. I like to point out our traffic signals for automobiles are based on the way that they ran railway traffic 100 years before that, okay? So, and this is key in the space industry right now, which is new, right? This is an area that I personally am interested in. How we figure out how to do stuff today is going to impact generations, because people are so easily locked into this is how we've always done it. And if you hear that at your organization, there's a warning bell. This is how we've always done it. You need to come talk to us at that point, okay? So reach out to us. It's easy to do. Just message me on LinkedIn or email me at jason@coldstartech.com. I want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.